He claimed that he had video footage. He also claimed to have the real Kim Porter memoir.
Because my next guest just testified before a federal grand jury. He says he was in possession of a trove of digital evidence from Diddy's freak-offs and parties.
The courtroom was electric, buzzing with whispers and the sharp clicks of reporters' heels against the polished floor. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy outside was enough to rival a red carpet premiere, except the star of this show wasn't basking in glory. Sean Diddy Combs, once the untouchable king of hip-hop and luxury, now sat at the defense table, his face unreadable, but his reputation hanging by a thread. He wasn't wearing the standard, dismal jumpsuit of someone in custody. No, Diddy had made sure to present himself in tailored sweaters and crisp button-downs, a deliberate move calculated to remind the jury and the world that behind the allegations was still the man who had once been a cultural powerhouse. But the polished exterior couldn't mask the shadows cast by the allegations looming over him.
You're hearing about all these videos with celebrities, not going to be part of the criminal case. And
Cassie video.
The Cassie video is going to be part.
Right.
We're going to get to that in a minute with the jury. But what we did was, number one, we showed them the prosecution's case from one of our documentaries. And then we showed them the defense from the current documentary.
The charges were nothing short of catastrophic. Racketeering, coercion, transportation related to questionable encounters. Each one read like the plot of a scandalous Hollywood thriller. But this wasn't fiction, at least not according to federal prosecutors. The accusations painted a picture of a man who allegedly twisted his wealth and influence into tools of manipulation, creating a world where his desires were paramount and others' boundaries were irrelevant. His empire, prosecutors claimed, wasn't just about music, parties, and fame. It was something far darker. And the centerpiece of their case, the so-called freak-offs, a chilling term that prosecutors used to describe elaborate, debauched gatherings that allegedly blurred the lines between consent and control.
There has been no profit motive involved at all. The last word is profit.
He's already rich.
So whether or not he had the freak-offs or he did whatever.
Follow the money.
Well, there is no money
Exactly.
to follow. I mean, the freak-offs aren't okay, the way in which I read it, it's not an illegal business. A freak-off is a freak, or whatever these things are, right? But the profit, that last word actually got my attention, because I was like...
While Diddy's legal team scrambled to argue that these were consensual adult escapades, the prosecution hammered a different narrative, one of power wielded like a weapon. The courtroom had barely settled when the prosecution's opening remarks laid bare their intentions. They promised to take the jury on a journey through nearly 2 decades of alleged misconduct, complete with shocking evidence and first-hand testimony. This is not about lifestyle choices, one prosecutor declared, her voice cutting through the room. This is about calculated manipulation, abuse, and a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored. If the charges alone weren't enough to send shockwaves through the industry, the evidence certainly was. The prosecution had a treasure trove of it: video footage, text messages, financial records, and, most damningly, testimony from those who had allegedly lived through the nightmare. Among the evidence was a surveillance video that had already made headlines, grainy footage showing Diddy in what appeared to be a physical altercation with one of the key witnesses, Cassie Ventura. The video, reportedly taken in a hotel hallway, was described as visceral and raw, enough to make even the most impartial viewer uncomfortable. It was a moment that prosecutors argued epitomized the darker side of the man who once ruled the music world with charm and swagger.
I think one thing that I haven't heard said at this table yet is bribery. So he probably promised a lot of these people either fame, fortune, riches. Whether or not he delivered, I doubt it, but that's another matter entirely, right? So that's obviously, if he incentivized some of these people in order to participate in all of these things, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Is that a definition, or does that fit a definition of coercion in any way, bribery?
Cassie herself was poised to be the star witness. Her testimony, insiders speculated, would be devastating. She wasn't just another name on a list of accusers. She had been one of Diddy's most high-profile partners, seen by millions as the glamorous counterpart to his larger-than-life persona. But her story, prosecutors alleged, was far from glamorous. Cassie was expected to recount years of alleged mistreatment and control, painting a picture not of a loving relationship, but of one marked by fear and manipulation. And she wasn't alone. Other witnesses, whose identities were being protected for their safety, were lined up to corroborate her claims, forming a chorus of voices that could prove impossible to ignore.
Big thing that is really interesting, and it's going to be a big problem for the defense if you look at this mock jury. The Cassie video. He is not being prosecuted for it. That's a state crime in California, and the statute of limitations is run. But I am telling you, that video was thunderous for a bunch of these jurors.
But Diddy's defense team wasn't going down without a fight. From the outset, they made it clear that their strategy was to dismantle the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. Their opening statements leaned heavily on the idea of consent and the blurred lines of adult relationships in a world fueled by fame and indulgence. What happens between consenting adults is their business, one of Diddy's attorneys argued, his voice calm but forceful. We're not here to judge lifestyles or preferences. We're here to judge facts, and the facts will show that Sean Combs is not guilty of these accusations. Still, the defense's strategy wasn't without its risks. They had chosen to lean into Diddy's larger-than-life persona, framing him as a man who had always lived outside the conventional boundaries of society. They argued that his so-called freak-offs were nothing more than consensual gatherings, blown out of proportion by individuals looking for a payday or revenge. But this approach came with a dangerous undertone. The more they admitted about Diddy's unconventional lifestyle, the harder it would be to separate him from the darker accusations. The jury would have to decide if his lifestyle was merely eccentric or something far more troubling. The legal chess match wasn't confined to the courtroom, though. Outside, the media circus was in full swing, dissecting every detail, every side eye, every whispered conversation. Commentators debated whether Diddy's downfall was a long time coming or if he was being unfairly targeted as a scapegoat for an industry notorious for its excesses. Social media was a battlefield, with hashtags alternately condemning and defending him. For every free Diddy post, there was a counterpoint demanding justice for the alleged victims. And then there were the rumors, whispers that Diddy's inner circle was crumbling, that former associates were distancing themselves, and that some might even be willing to testify against him in exchange for leniency.
We've talked about the fact that there's sometimes videos or photos or what don't get admitted to a case because they're
overly
prejudicial.
Right. This is getting admitted. Both sides.
It's definitely getting admitted.
Both sides agree. It's going to be admissible. The defense has a hurdle to jump. I will tell you that they vote in the end, and the vote may surprise you.
One of the most surprising developments came when it was revealed that Diddy had turned down a plea deal. The details of the offer weren't made public, but legal experts speculated that it would have required him to admit guilt to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. Turning it down was a gamble, one that suggested either immense confidence in his defense or a refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing whatsoever. Either way, it was a move that raised eyebrows and added another layer of tension to an already explosive case. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a stage for high drama. Potential jurors were grilled about their knowledge of the case, their opinions on the music industry, and even their views on unconventional lifestyles. One prospective juror admitted to having seen the infamous hotel video and described it as damning. Another revealed that they had once liked a satirical social media post mocking the allegations, a revelation that led to their dismissal. The judge, U.S. District Judge Arun Subramanian, made it clear that he would not tolerate distractions or theatrics, but even he couldn't entirely contain the spectacle.
You know, there's a short life in
Why do you think that is, what the creative side is?
Well, because losing out money, you got to take, you're going through so much to try and deal with life.
The stakes were impossibly high. If convicted, Diddy faced a potential life sentence, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle he had once flaunted. His defense team knew they had to do more than just poke holes in the prosecution's case. They had to completely dismantle it brick by brick. Meanwhile, the prosecution seemed equally determined to hold him accountable, presenting a narrative that was as compelling as it was disturbing. Every day brought new revelations, new twists, and new questions about what the jury would ultimately decide. But as the trial continued, another story began to emerge. A story that hinted at something even bigger than the courtroom drama. Whispers of fear and betrayal began to circulate, suggesting that Diddy's inner circle was on edge, terrified that the walls were closing in.
You are literally, it's an unhealthy space. And so eventually you're going to go too far, you know? Who knows what happened to Philip? Who knows what he had to do in order to get to where he was at? There's a lot of things that people do that end up sitting and they can't get over it. And they got to keep getting high, hoping to get it out of their head, you know? But when you lose your man card.
And just when it seemed like the courtroom drama had nowhere else to go, the whispers started. Quiet at first, barely audible over the media frenzy surrounding Diddy's trial, but growing louder with every passing day. Whispers of panic, whispers of dread, whispers that the people who once stood shoulder to shoulder with him, those who attended the infamous gatherings, those who worked behind the scenes, those who knew the machinery of his empire better than anyone, were terrified they'd be next. The prosecution's spotlight wasn't just on Diddy anymore. It was starting to cast long, dark shadows over his entourage, his confidants, and the unseen hands who might have helped make it all possible. Because here's the thing, no one builds an empire alone. And if the allegations against Diddy painted even a fraction of the truth, then this so-called enterprise was bigger than just one man. It was systemic. It was a network. And now that network was cracking under pressure. Sources close to the investigation hinted that several of Diddy's former associates had been quietly approached by federal agents. Deals were being offered in exchange for cooperation. Immunity was on the table, but only for those willing to flip. And if the rumors were true, some of them were already talking. The fear among Diddy's inner circle was palpable. These were people who had once enjoyed the spoils of his success. Lavish parties, extravagant gifts, private jets to destinations most could only dream of. But now, those same people were reportedly deleting emails, scrubbing their phones, and praying that their names wouldn't appear in any court filings. Some had gone into hiding altogether, refusing to answer calls or appear in public. Others were said to be lawyering up, bracing for the possibility that they might be dragged into the courtroom themselves.
That's the only thing I can think of. You lose your damn man card.
What is that? What do you mean by that?
You give up your ability, your right to being a man. A man don't take it, a man gives it. So when you give up that man card, you don't get that back.
Are you saying what I think you're saying?
No, I'm saying what I'm saying.
And then there were the names that had started surfacing in court documents, in witness testimonies, in off-the-record conversations with journalists, names that sent shockwaves through both the music industry and Hollywood. These weren't just background players or anonymous staffers. They were recognizable, influential, and in some cases, beloved figures who had, at one point or another, been part of Diddy's orbit. The kind of people who, if implicated, could bring an entire industry to its knees. Take, for example, the whispers surrounding a certain A-list actor, someone whose name had reportedly come up during a closed-door hearing. This actor, known for their squeaky clean image and box office dominance, had been a guest at more than a few of Diddy's infamous gatherings. While no formal accusations had been made against them, their mere association with the events was enough to spark a media firestorm. Industry insiders speculated that if this actor were called to testify, it could shatter their carefully crafted public persona. And let's not even get started on the rumors about a Grammy-winning artist who had been a frequent collaborator with Diddy, the kind of artist who might have seen more behind the scenes than they ever intended to.
That was all the people that went to the Puffy parties. That was all the people that did all those things thinking that there was never going to be a consequence for what they were doing. Got punked out and pimped out by some greater desire. You shouldn't have a greater desire than being a man. So I believe that's a big problem with a lot of the actors out there because they get fluid. And next thing you know, once you go fluid, it's gone.
But it wasn't just the celebrities who were sweating. Behind every headline-grabbing name was a battalion of managers, publicists, personal assistants, and security personnel, people who had been in the trenches, who had facilitated the logistics, who had turned a blind eye when things got messy. These were the people who knew where the metaphorical bodies were buried because they had helped dig the holes. And now, with the trial in full swing, their silence was becoming increasingly expensive. The prosecution was said to be particularly interested in one individual, a former employee who had reportedly been responsible for coordinating travel arrangements for Diddy's events. This person, who had left the industry years ago and was now living under the radar, was rumored to have detailed records, flight logs, hotel bookings, expense reports that could corroborate key elements of the allegations. If they were to take the stand, it could be a game changer. But sources close to the case suggested that this person was reluctant to cooperate, fearing retaliation or public backlash.
Did you ever have the opportunity where you got invited and you said no to it?
Hell yeah.
What was the consequences when you said no?
Puffy invited me for weeks, asking me to come and teach him how to, wanted me to be his acting coach for a while. Go there and he's sitting around just looking. I'm like, okay, what's the material you want to work on? He's just looking at me.
What made this particular former employee so pivotal wasn't just their access to logistical details. It was their alleged role in managing the guest lists for these gatherings. According to insiders, this individual held the key to understanding exactly who was present at these events and, more importantly, who might have been complicit in enabling them. Names reportedly tied to these guest lists had already begun circulating among industry whisper networks, sending shockwaves through elite circles. High-profile figures, once considered untouchable, were nervously awaiting subpoenas, terrified that their attendance at these gatherings, even as passive participants, could now be spun into complicity. The prosecution was said to be laser-focused on connecting the dots between Diddy's alleged actions and the broader network that facilitated them, and this employee could very well provide the missing puzzle piece. Adding to the intrigue, a leaked document from a previous lawsuit hinted that several financial transactions linked to this employee's tenure might not have been as above board as they appeared. Payments labeled as event expenses were reportedly flagged during an internal investigation by one of Diddy's now defunct business ventures. These payments, some of which were allegedly routed through offshore accounts, raised questions about whether they were tied to the activities now under scrutiny. If these financial breadcrumbs led to anything substantial, it wouldn't just implicate Diddy. It could bring down an entire ecosystem of enablers who had profited from looking the other way.
Now you know to be hands-off with somebody. A number of producers come in to make the approach, and you threaten to punch them in the mouth, or threaten to knock their head off for talking to you like, or looking at you like you're a woman. You know, when you approach a real man about his masculinity, you're going to get a real reaction back. It's a difference when a guy walks in a room and when a man walks into a room. And a man don't take the same things that a guy will accept.
And that fear wasn't unfounded. The entertainment industry has long been a place where loyalty is valued above all else, where speaking out against a powerful figure can mean career ruin. For years, Diddy had been one of the most powerful men in the business, a gatekeeper who could make or break careers with a single phone call. Even now, with his empire crumbling, the ripple effects of his influence could still be felt. There were whispers that some potential witnesses had been pressured to stay silent, that stories had been buried before they could ever see the light of day. And while the prosecution was doing everything in its power to protect its witnesses, the reality was that testifying against someone like Diddy came with risks, both professional and personal. Meanwhile, the trial was sending shockwaves through the entertainment industry as a whole. This wasn't just about one man's alleged misdeeds. It was about the culture that had allowed those misdeeds to flourish. For years, Diddy had been at the center of a world that celebrated excess, that blurred the lines between personal and professional, that turned a blind eye to behavior that should have raised alarm bells. And now, that world was under scrutiny like never before.
Have lost businesses because I don't bend over in that way. I don't compromise. I don't play gay roles. I don't kiss a man. I don't do that because the man card means everything.
Record labels were reportedly scrambling to review their policies, fearing that the trial could expose systemic issues that went far beyond Diddy. Executives were holding emergency meetings, trying to assess the potential fallout. Some were even said to be quietly distancing themselves from artists and producers who had been closely associated with Diddy, fearing guilt by association. And then there were the publicists, working overtime to control the narrative, to spin the story, to protect their clients from the gathering storm. But for all the damage control happening behind the scenes, the cracks were already starting to show. One major streaming platform was reportedly in talks to remove Diddy's music from its playlists, a move that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. Several of his former collaborators had issued carefully worded statements expressing vague support for the truth while conspicuously avoiding any direct mention of Diddy. And then there were the award shows, where his absence was starting to feel like an elephant in the room. At one recent event, a presenter made a thinly veiled joke about the trial, only for the audience to respond with an awkward mix of laughter and silence. And yet, despite the growing backlash, there were still those who stood by him. Loyalists who believed in his innocence, who saw the trial as a witch hunt, who argued that the allegations were nothing more than an elaborate shakedown. These were the people who wore free puff shirts outside the courthouse, who flooded social media with messages of support, who refused to believe that the man who had given them so much music, so much culture, could be capable of the things he was accused of. But loyalty only goes so far. And as more details emerged, as more witnesses took the stand, as more crack appeared in the carefully constructed facade, the question wasn't just whether Diddy would be found guilty or innocent. It was whether the world he had built and the people who had helped him build it would survive the fallout.
Stuff. Are you done with Hollywood because of this specific
I'm
reason?
still working. I still, I haven't made the money necessary to do all of the other stuff. So I still have to go and do the chitlin circuit. I still have to do the job that I need to. But eventually, I've done what I set out to do, which was to redefine the universe. I've proven what I've set out to do, and that's why I have all the patents. Whether they evaluate it or not, that's up to them.
So what do you think? Is this a case of one man's empire crumbling under the weight of its own excess? Or is there something even darker hiding in the shadows? Are we witnessing the unraveling of a legacy? Or is this just the beginning of an even bigger scandal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, stay tuned. This story is far from over.